I'm really excited about this. I've been wanting to talk about leadership for quite some time. One of the things that fascinates me about Kanban, it's got these different principles, and leadership at every level is one of them. And it got me thinking when Catherine asked me to be on this track, what would it look like if every single person in this room could be a leader at something? Okay? So first of all, just to get a feel of who's in this room, please put your hands up if you're in a leadership position, a team lead, scrum master, coach, manager. Okay, so have a look around. This is all the people who are already in leadership positions. Your job will be to pay attention to the bits where I show you how to make everybody else in the room a leader, okay? By the time we leave this, you'll understand not only how to become a leader, but also why you already are. All right. So I thought it was deliberate. I was like, okay, it's much easier to do the talk when the room's dark and I can't see how many people are in it. I was like, oh, this is so much better. Okay. So for those who are in Geeta's talk and got to see the imposter syndrome, yeah, I get that too. And you'll understand why it's an awesome thing even more by the end of this talk, so I will cover it as well. So I wanted to go find out what other people out there thought of leaders, and I came across this article on Forbes. So this is an article, it basically says, here's the top 10 qualities that make a great leader. You can read them. What I wanted to ask was, can you put your hands up if you've had training in one of those? Okay. Put your hands down if you got it because you were moving into a leadership position or you already were in a leadership position. Who's had training in this who wasn't in a leadership position? So it's about 6 people, 7 people, 8 people, some. Okay, so we've got a few, but it's not many. This is the problem. People who are in leadership positions get given the leadership training. I want everybody to be able to do the things that make them great leaders. Now, this I found really interesting because it's missing the one thing that makes people leaders. There's one trait that every single leader, whether they're good or bad, has that isn't on this. Can anyone guess what it is? Followers, thank you very much. This is what makes leaders. Okay, so put your hands up if you've got followers on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. Come on, everybody's got followers on something these days, right? Is there anybody who genuinely has no followers at all on anything? I really want to know how you've managed that because I get followed all the time. When you have followers, you have influence. And I'm sure that those of you who don't have formal followers on Twitter and Facebook, you probably still have influence over somebody's life. And this is what it means to be a leader, right? And a great leader influences people in great ways. That's really all there is to it. So I'm going to show you what influence really looks like. I'm going to show you how to make great decisions and how to help other people make great decisions too. One of the things I wanted to know was where this whole phrase, leadership at every level, where's it come from? Because I'm pretty sure it wasn't in Kanban. So I did some Googling, and I found all the way back to 1983 was the earliest mention. It comes from the Marines and the armed forces in the States. They have this thing of leadership at every level, and this is one of the quotes: leadership's found through the ranks and at every level of the Marine Corps. Every Marine is trained to act instinctively and effectively, regardless of the situation. And the reason is because these guys, they have to make decisions very quickly. They're trained to work in chaotic environments where there may be all kinds of things going on, and they don't have time to ask for instructions. So I was wondering, do we actually need leadership at every level, given we're not always in these chaotic environments? I mean, the only time we tend to be in those environments in software is when we've done an urgent production bug. Most of the time, we're not in that kind of stress. Software development is ranked as one of the least stressful occupations. But we do need to make decisions. And it's useful to not have to go and get instructions every time to make those decisions. It's one of the reasons why Agile works. Because the people on the ground get to change direction. They get to talk to the people directly that they need instructions on, rather than getting it from some manager, some leader who's been assigned to them. And everything is about those decisions, right? Everything about leadership is, how do we do this? What do we do? Who do we talk to get it done? Those can be some of the most awkward questions that you can answer. Traditionally, the decisions, the answers to those questions used to be made right at the beginning by a bunch of people doing a big load of documentation, which would then be passed to the software developers. And we really wouldn't have to make any decisions. First 7 years of my career, I worked like that, right? I didn't really have decisions to make. I was just coding. And it was very low stress. But now we have to actually make these decisions ourselves, and there's a problem with it. This is a quote from Dave Snowden's article in Harvard Business Review, A Leader's Framework for Decision-Making. Even though we know we have to change direction, a lot of the time we're still making decisions far too early, with the wrong people, at the wrong time, and in the wrong way. And he put together this framework to help us make better decisions. So I'm going to introduce it to you. Hands up if you've heard of Cynefin. Put your hands up if you haven't heard of Cynefin. Right, so that's most of the room have not heard of Cynefin. I am going to keep introducing this framework until there are more people who know about it than don't, okay? Every single one of my talks has this in. There's a really good reason for it. This has been completely life-changing for me. This has totally changed not only the way in which I live my life, but my relationships, my personal relationships as well. So it's the most awesome thing I've ever come across, apart from maybe cats. Cats are pretty awesome. Okay, Cynefin has 5 domains. They are domains, not quadrants, 5 of them. It's not a matrix. The borders are fuzzy and things move around this framework as well, and I'll show you that too. The easiest domain to understand is the obvious domain. And the obvious domain is situations where either a child can solve the problem, or if it does require expertise, the solution is obvious. Okay, so decisions are really obvious. So I go to the landlady in my pub, and I say to my landlady, what do you do when the beer runs out? And she says, well, I change the barrel, obviously. Now, I don't know how to change a barrel, but the solution is still obvious. And in this situation, we can just categorize the problem. We can go, oh, it's one of those. Okay. But as things become more and more complicated, expertise is required. So a watchmaker knows how to fix a watch, and a car mechanic knows how to fix a car. But we know what a working watch looks like. We know what a working car looks like. So it's still predictable. It just requires expertise. And analysis works really well in this situation. You can go to an expert and ask them about their ideas and ask them about their knowledge and get some of their knowledge, and then you code. And you probably want to get feedback as well because you're human and you will make mistakes. But you can use expertise in this space. And analysis works. It's the complex domain that trips everybody up. Human beings have this innate dislike of uncertainty. And we're always trying to look for patterns that repeat themselves. And in the complex domain, patterns don't repeat themselves. You can do the same thing and then do it again, and you'll get a different result. And you can see in retrospect how things happen. Cause and effect can be correlated in retrospect, but you can't make predictions. So I'll give you an example of this. There was a company called Ludicor. They had this big online game called Neverending. And they said, we want more people to come play this game with us. What would we do? I know, we'll set up a site where people can share screenshots of the game. And then the players will share the screenshots, and everybody will see, well, how pretty the game is, and they'll want to come join. They'll see how engaged the players are. They'll want to come join. So they set up this site, and people started sharing the screenshots and their holiday photos and photos of their family and cats, of course. And that became Flickr. And you can see in retrospect how that happened, but you couldn't possibly have predicted it. That's actually an example of exaptation. It's using things not for what they were designed for. Feathers on dinosaurs becoming birds is another example from nature. But we get these emergent outcomes in the complex domain. And those of you who've worked on Agile projects, you're probably familiar with this. You show something to the stakeholders and they go, oh, okay, that's not quite right. Can we do this, do this, do this? And we steer our way towards an outcome. And it's not quite what we predicted, but we do get there. What we have to do in the complex domain is called probe. It means to try something out in a way that's safe to fail, because it might not work. The reason this is important is because of this domain, chaos. Chaos is accident and emergency. It's your house burning down. It's somebody bleeding to death. And in chaos, you have to act and act quickly. It is a transient domain. It will resolve itself, and it might not resolve itself in your favor. At the end of 2012, there was a company called Knight Capital Group. They released something onto 8 of their 9 servers and forgot the 9th one. And when they turned the software on to start trading, the 9th server started putting spurious trades on their behalf into the marketplace. 45 minutes later, they had worked out what it was and switched it off. By that point, they had lost something like $13 billion. And the big banks have this agreement that when something like that happens, they'll wind it back, so it was obviously an error, and one day it's going to be them. So they wound it back, but at the end of the day, when they tot up how much they really had lost, it was still $450 million. And it prompted the company's fire sale, so that company no longer exists as a result. 45 minutes it took for that chaos to resolve itself, and it did not resolve itself in their favor. And sometimes things are not safe to fail there, right? If your house is burning down and you don't get out, that's not safe. Chaos doesn't care. The other reason that is important is because of the 5th domain, the domain of disorder. So disorder is a domain where we don't know which of these dominates, so we behave according to our preferred domain, for whatever the situation is. I'm a dev. Devs quite like complexity, which means that we really hate reading the instructions. And I've got myself into trouble failing to read the instructions on something that wasn't safe to fail. A more common problem is that we treat complex stuff as if it's complicated. So put your hands up if you've ever been asked for an estimate in time or money for something you've never done before. Keep your hands up if you gave one. Keep your hands up if that then got treated as a promise or a commitment. And everybody's hands are up, right? That's disorder. It's when you do something new, you don't know what you're going to discover. The complex domain is the domain of the unknown unknowns. And you can tell it's going to be risky. It's also the highest value stuff, because it's the reason why we're doing it. It's because it's new. And yet we treat it as if it can be analyzed, as if it can be predicted. And I see people do things like they put little process policies like must have clear acceptance criteria. You might not be able to get clear acceptance criteria if it's very new. You might have to try something out and do a prototype, do a spike. So I'm hoping this is giving you some ideas for how you might lead people differently and make suggestions. Even as a dev, you can make the suggestion, well, you know, this is new. Can I do a spike? Can I do a prototype? Can we try something out? That's a leadership decision. Okay. So in the obvious domain, we can lead through control. We can just tell people what to do, you know, and parents, you know what you're like with your kids, right? You constrain it so that it's safe for them. Make sure there's nothing around them, so you're controlling the environment. In the complicated domain, we lead through expertise. These are my things, by the way. I haven't checked them with Dave Snowden, so if you tweet them and Dave says, oh, that's wrong, he's probably right. In the complex domain, we get emergent leadership, and this is why it's important to have leaders at every level. Because we don't know where they're going to be needed, and when a leader does emerge, we want to make sure that that leader is supported. And in chaos, we have leadership through action. Command and control actually works really well in chaos. You can tell people what to do, and Mayor Giuliani was praised for his response to the 9/11 attacks. Unfortunately, he carried on doing that after it was over and got voted out. But there you go, that's the leadership styles. I also wanted to give you this scale. I found this scale really, really helpful for working out whether I'm in complexity or not. So I asked people, who in the world's ever done this before? We say 5, nobody in the world's ever done this before. It's about as complex as you can get. All right. 4, somebody outside the organization's done it, probably a competitor, not somebody that we've got access to, so we've got no access to expertise. It's still high discovery. We're still going to make discoveries there. 3, somebody in the company's done it before, so we have access to expertise, but remembering that we're human and human beings are complex, we probably also want feedback. 2, someone in the team's done it before, and 1, we all know how to do it. Just going to let the people take the photos. Incidentally, this is all on my blog. If you look up Liz Keogh, Estimating Complexity, you'll find the article about it. But the 5s and 4s are complex. The 3s, analysis works pretty well when you have access to an expert. 2s and 1s, you shouldn't be spending a lot of time on. It's familiar. It's a web CRUD form. What's the chances of getting a web CRUD form wrong? Right? You know what it looks like. It's really predictable. And now you can see where you want to be putting the focus of trying things out, where you want to be getting feedback and making sure you get feedback early. It's on those 5s and 4s. I showed this to somebody who was leading a target operating model team. And he looked at this, he said, oh, sort of 5s and 4s, that's where the risk is. And I hadn't told him this. I said, yes, I was pretty impressed. He said, but it's where the value is too. This is why we're doing it. I said, yes. He said, so we should do those first. I said, yes, absolutely, you should. Embrace the uncertainty. He said, but the entire industry does it the other way round. And I went, oh, yeah, they do that. Yeah, they do. And I looked at what he'd done on the wall. He and his team had taken the whole target operating model. They had everything that they could analyze and was familiar, and gaps for where the uncertainty was. They'd done exactly the other way round. They were hoping that the analysis would fall out, and of course it never does. They were inviting people to come see this thing and give feedback, and everybody's going, yeah, it looks fine, right? That's not feedback. You want people saying, oh, I can see problems with that. That's where you start getting that feedback, and it matters, okay? So embrace uncertainty, do the 5s and 4s first, make it safe to fail. I'm going to be talking a lot about safety in this talk. Here's how it falls on the Cynefin diagram. 5s and 4s are complex. 3s, complicated. 2s, you've probably got expertise. It's a little bit of expertise. And 1s, don't worry about it. Use something off the shelf, for goodness sakes. If you have to rewrite 2s and 1s, make it into a library and get it out your build. You don't want that stuff in your build. Okay. You're probably actually all familiar with this. Does anybody remember the first ever mobile phones? With cameras on? Yeah? More people should remember the ones with first phones with cameras on. I'm old enough to remember them. One day there's going to be a generation where they all never grew up with those little wind phones. Do you remember? Like you had to dial them, right? And you couldn't take them away from the lounge with you. You had to go to the lounge to make a phone call. I remember those. Okay, the point is that the first ever cameras on phones were differentiating. There was something new, and not many people made phones with cameras on. Keogh were one of the early people who made a camera phone. If you go to Wikipedia, you can see it. They've got it pointing towards the user because they thought people would use it for video calls. And Nokia discovered that wasn't the case, that people really wanted to take photos. So they did what's called spoiling the differentiator. And they made it so it's easy to have cameras on phones. What does a phone also need to do, aside from pictures? Nothing to do with the camera at all. Sorry? Calling. It needs to call people, right? It's a phone. You need to call people. This is what we call commodities. Table stakes, David Anderson calls them. Things you need just to play the game. Right? You've got to be able to make a phone call on a phone, otherwise it's pointless. Hands up if you've got a camera on your phone. Keep your hands up if you've got 2, one on the front and one on the back. Right? Cameras have now become commoditized. And the great thing about it is, once something is that stable and that well understood and there's expertise around it, you can then build on it with innovative things like Pokemon Go. Yay! right? And you get innovation builds on it, and then innovation builds on that, and this is the innovation cycle. And now you can see you're all familiar with Cynefin, but you can also see why the complex domain is a really important one for software, and why a lot of the decisions we need to make need to be made at ground level. And it needs you to step up and say, let me try something out, and then we'll have a better understanding. Okay. So I want to talk very quickly, just let me grab a drink. I want to talk very quickly about how you can grow your expertise so that you can actually lead in a particular field, in a particular discipline. This is the way that I tend to do it. It's based on a thing called Dreyfus Modelling. Dreyfus was a couple of brothers did this model of skills acquisition, and there's some debate about whether it's actually true, whether it's useful. I find it useful. Here's how I use it. Dan North introduced this model to me. Apparently they made several, but this one was one of the first. So the first level of the Dreyfus model is a novice. Novices are very conscious of what they're doing. So those of us who've learnt to drive, we probably remember what it was like to learn to drive, how conscious we were of, steering, stalling the car, you know. So we're really conscious of the practices we're doing. And somebody's telling us what to do, and we're just doing it. The experienced beginner is the dangerous one. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in and everybody thinks they get it. Then we get to the competent level where we can actually do it successfully. So this is like you've just got your license. It doesn't mean you're not going to have an accident, it just means you won't kill anyone. Then we get knowledgeable practitioners, people who are starting to understand the theory and starting to collect multiple ways of doing things. And then we get experts, and experts are experts in the field. They're using it in unusual ways. They're doing strange things with it. So when I take this model, the first thing I want to do with it is replace that word competent, because somebody who is not competent in one skill is probably competent in another, and I don't want them thinking they're incompetent. So I replace this with practitioner. Then I find there are too many words, so I'm going to reduce them all to one word, just makes it easy, and I give them all a number, from 1 to 5. Okay? And then I ask people, here's some examples of how somebody behaves as a novice, right? So a novice TDDer, maybe you're writing tests after the code. That's an okay way to start. I mean, it's not brilliant TDD, but it's a good start. You've started. Brilliant. Welcome on the journey. If you're not good at something, don't worry about it. I don't grow experts from novices. If somebody doesn't have any interest of getting beyond a novice practice, I'm like, you do your thing. Find the things you are good at. We'll get you growing there. When somebody is a beginner and they go, okay, so now I'm getting it, I think I'm getting it, you can say, okay, well, here's some examples of what somebody who's successful at TDD does. I'm just using TDD as an example, right? They write their tests before they write their code. Do you do that? Oh, most of the time, maybe. Okay, well, there's an example of something that we could do. Right? So what I'm looking for is to get them behaving independently of my guidance so that they're successful. It particularly becomes interesting when they want to mark themselves 2.5. They're like, well, I've got some of the practitioner examples you've got there. I've got some of the successful practices. And that's a sign that they want to be in that successful, independent practitioner level. When somebody is at the practitioner level, I'm completely okay leaving them there if they want to be there, right? That's okay. But sometimes you find people who go, you know what, I'd love to be able to do these things with this. I think I'm getting this a lot. I think I'm becoming good at this. And they'll give you examples of things they're doing that are a bit more than just competent. If you can find that desire, you can take them to the next level, and the next level is influential. The next level is where they start bringing up other people. They start turning into leaders in that field. Now, a really interesting thing happens if you start finding leaders in niche places. So where there's very few people who actually know how to influence others with that skill or that practice or that way of thinking. Those people who are in that niche place, they start getting relied on. I found this with BDD. I was one of the few early BDDers, and people started relying on me for teaching BDD, and I got imposter syndrome. because they were treating me as though I was an expert, and I wasn't. I was just knowledgeable. The good thing is that if you're in that position, you will feel so uncomfortable, you will run to get that expertise and you will become an expert. Oh yeah. Okay? This is why imposter syndrome in that situation is a good thing. You will become an expert. Nobody needs to turn a knowledgeable practitioner into an expert. They will do it themselves. Okay? How I do this with other people is with a thing called the GROW framework. So this is a really basic coaching framework. You can use this to help people develop their lives. You can use it on yourself. Work out what your goal is. See if you can find some nice concrete examples of that goal. What will it look like if I achieve this goal? Look at your reality, where you are right now. Think of some options for going forward and closing that gap, getting better at that thing. What books do you have? What people could you talk to? What conferences could you go to? And then pick some as the way forward. Really, really simple. And you can talk people through the Dreyfus model and go, okay, you've marked yourself a 2.5 on that, we're all good. By the way, if people ever want to mark themselves high and just go, no, I'm definitely a 3, I'm like, sure, you can be a 3, I don't mind. You know, it's about finding where they want to grow. And then you can find examples of where they want to get to and help them close that gap, help them work out what they've got available to them to close that gap. And you don't even need expertise yourself to talk people through this. I've helped people work out how to go be a better tennis player, and goodness knows, I can't play tennis for toffee. Okay, so you don't need expertise yourself to use this framework. For those of you who are into BDD, anybody here a BDD fan? Right, I use this quite a lot. This is literally the same thing as BDD. We've got a reality, a context in which we're acting. We've got this action that we're going to take, this way forward that we've chosen, and we've got some outcomes that we're hoping to achieve as a result. You can use all the same techniques you use in BDD, all the same conversational techniques, to start looking at and exploring your own lives. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment. Okay. So now I'm challenging you all to become leaders. And I imagine some of you are possibly feeling a little bit fluttery about that. Goodness knows, I come up onto stage and I talk, and for the first 5 minutes of a talk, I'm like this, right? Every single time. One of the things that you can do if you want to be an awesome leader is just recognize when you're feeling stressed. And instead of reacting, treat it with curiosity. There's probably a context that is making you stressed, and if it's making you stressed, it might be making other people stressed too. I had a friend who was a tester, and he was a really stressed guy. He got very angry very easily, very frustrated very easily. And he said, but Liz, how do you stop? You're always so calm. How do you stop feeling angry? How do you stop feeling frustrated? I said, it's not the feelings that are a problem, it's the reaction to them. So one of the things you can do as a leader is, rather than just reacting, go, okay, what outcome do I want? What do I want to achieve for myself? What do I want to achieve for the other people in this room? And count to 10 and then react. Right? I know everybody says, count to 10 before you speak if you're angry. This is why. Because this allows you to actually treat your emotions with curiosity, look for that context, and go, okay, maybe we can change that. All right, I said I was going to talk about safety. I'm going to show you how I make sure there is safety in the room. So this is useful for finding out if people are stressed. I do this particularly with retrospectives, but you can use it for anything where safety might be important. This is just a really simple scale I do with numbers. I ask people to write these on a Post-it, and I've learnt they've got to be the same Post-it, the same Sharpie pen, and then you fold it into quarters, right? Sorry, when I say the same Post-it, not everybody writing on one Post-it, everybody writing on the same colour Post-it, so you can't tell who's written what. And they write 1, I'm going to nod and stay quiet, right? I'm not feeling very safe at all. 2, I might talk about some things I want to fix, but mostly I'm going to stay quiet. 3, I'll share my opinions. I'll stay away from controversial stuff. 4, I will talk frankly but sensitively. And 5, yeah, I'm good. I will talk about anything in this room with these people. Now, I used to do this not in an anonymous way, and it was really interesting. This one group voted 5s. I said, I'm going to do this safety check, and the manager wrote 5 on a piece of paper and threw it in the middle, and there you go. Everybody in this team is safe, and everybody went, yeah, all safe, and they all wrote 5s. I said, all right, next week, we've got some people coming from offshore to join us, and they might not feel as safe as you do. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to make sure we do this anonymously and do it properly just for them. Of course, it was just for them. I was lying. I said, let's do it anonymously. And I unfolded the first note, and it was a 4. And the manager went, who wrote that? Right. I've now learnt that you get even more honest answers if you tell them that you're not going to share the numbers. You're going to share the average of the numbers, or you're going to let them know if there are any 1s and 2s. I had one retrospective. It was a very big one, company-wide retrospective with the entire IT department, all the devs, all the testers, all the BAs, no managers in the room, just a couple of the coaches. And we had quite a lot of 1s and 2s. And I found that really interesting because we were the only leaders in an official leadership position in the room. And we said, what if we get one of the devs to do this? We've trained some of the devs in running retros. What if we got one of your group to do this? Can we rerun this? And the coaches are going to go out the room, rerun the safety check. Do you feel safer? And they did. The 1s and 2s almost completely disappeared. And we're like, okay, they don't feel safe with the coaches. That's really interesting. And we let them run the retro, and we actually got some of the best feedback as coaches from that retrospective. If there are managers in the room, I might ask the managers if they'd mind leaving while we rerun the safety check, because it's more important to be able to talk than it is for the managers to be there. It actually emerged in retrospect, as these things do, that there had been a round of redundancies, and they thought some of the coaches' feedback had played into who got made redundant. And of course it hadn't, but that was the myth that was going around. That was why they weren't feeling safe. Sometimes people aren't even feeling safe enough to use this safety check. So I have a different one. I learnt this originally as explorer, shopper, vacationer, prisoner. So has anyone come across this? Hands up if you've come across this. Few people, right? So the idea is you say which of these you feel like. An explorer is somebody who wants to explore and is really willing, and a shopper's come for some specific things. A vacationer's just happy to be away from their desk for a bit, and a prisoner is being forced to be there. What I found is nobody will ever vote prisoner because they don't want to be seen to be forced to be there, so I've replaced it with worker. You're willing to be there, right? Nobody's being imprisoned, for goodness sakes. So people will vote worker. They won't vote for prisoner, but they will vote worker, and you can get a sense of how people are feeling about the retro, and it's an even safer thing than the other safety check. So you can make it safe like that. Special note, I sometimes run retrospectives where I get people to draw things. We call it art attack. People will draw things that they will not talk about. This can be problematic if they're not feeling safe. If you are ever doing an art attack retrospective, make sure people feel safe first. They will draw the elephants in the room. Okay? They will draw. I've had people draw some of the most foul things you can imagine and go, yeah, that's our server, right? They will draw the elephants in the room. Okay, so I want to talk about some common elephants in the room. I'm going to use Julian Birkinshaw's organizing models for this because it's my favorite thing at the moment, apart from Cynefin and cats. Julian Birkinshaw showed me this as part of the ESP conference way back in the beginning of the year, and I looked at it and I was like, this is magic. This makes so much sense. He says there's 3 kinds of organizations. The first is a bureaucracy. And in a bureaucracy, position is privilege, right? Position is the people who are valued most in the organization are the ones higher up in the hierarchy. You make decisions by rules, and people are motivated by extrinsic rewards. Right? So you coordinate with rules, you make decisions by hierarchy, people are motivated by extrinsic rewards. If you can move to a meritocracy, once labor and production aren't scarce, knowledge is the thing that becomes scarce. And people who have knowledge become privileged. And you can coordinate by mutually adjusting. It's a bit like an Agile project. You make decisions, theoretically, through logical argument. I have yet to meet a human being who can do this consistently. And we're motivated by personal mastery. So those of you who are familiar with Dan Pink's work, Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose, right? This is where the skills start to grow. It's really hard to develop leaders in an organization that's still bureaucratic. I don't have many solutions for you except that bureaucracies happen when production and labor are scarce, so you can automate your way out of that. Once production and labor stop being scarce, you'll be valued because you understand how the automation works. So you can grow yourself as a leader if you're in that technical space. Hands up who's not technical here. It's a couple of people. Don't be shy, it's okay. I haven't programmed for 3 years, it's fine. There are other things you can do. All right. The really interesting thing happens when knowledge is no longer scarce and information is no longer scarce. Once the things we need to make decisions are broadcasted through the organization, you've got analytics giving you the information, everybody is data-driven, you get an adhocracy. And action and conviction become prioritized. And you're in a startup culture at this stage, right? You're seizing opportunities, you're making decisions through experimentation, and you're motivated by achievement. For those who are looking to try and transform into a startup culture and are still prioritizing people through hierarchy, you've got another step in between that you've got to get to first. Okay? You can tell if you're in the bureaucracy because you'll be in one of those places where you can't possibly pay the devs more than the managers. And I can see a few people like, oh, okay. Right. So those are some other ways decisions get made. Now you can see where you are and you can find ways to move yourself forward. The problem with information is we are still at a stage where when we start projects, when we start our software efforts, information is often very low, very scarce. And when we don't try things out, we don't get that information very quickly. And people don't like uncertainty, so they tend to try and analyze. And they'll break down all of your backlog into tiny little stories. Put your hands up if you've got more than 100 stories in your backlog right now. Right? Look at that. That's a fair chunk of the room. Okay? So that decision's already been made about those 100-odd stories. We make decisions really, really early. And then as the project goes on, that's when we start getting information. And the place where we would like to be making all the decisions is right here at the end. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick couple of techniques for getting information early and for keeping your options open so you can make decisions later. One is from my mate Dan North. He taught me BDD, but he's also taught me this thing called deliberate discovery. He's got these 3 rules. First of all, assume there's stuff you don't know. You have ignorance. Assume second-order ignorance. This is the unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. But you now know where it is. It's always in the new stuff. Optimize for discovery. Okay? That means try things out in a way that's safe to fail, then you get more information and you have better understanding, and now you're starting to move into that complicated domain. This is pretty simple. Real options is even more fun. This comes from my friend Chris Matz, and he's got 3 rules as well. They like having 3 rules for things. He says options have value. So we know that in finance, options actually have a value. You can buy and sell options, which is the right but not the obligation to buy or sell something at a later date. So we have the right but not the obligation to do something. Options expire. At some point, you have to make a decision, or a decision will be made for you. And this is the magic one. Never commit early unless you know why. So I'm going to tell you a story which illustrates how we use this. Back in the Lean conference, they had this thing called the Brickell Key Award. It's given to 2 people who've progressed the state of the art of Lean and Kanban every year. And they have a short list of 6 people. So this particular conference, they had this short list. They wanted to narrow it down to 2 people. And the people who needed to vote were people like David Anderson, Don Reinertsen, Carl Scotland, all of them very highly paid, expensive consultants who are based right around the world. And they could not get them into one room together. The only day they could do it was the day before the conference, where everybody was finally together. So the conference started on Tuesday. They got them together on the Monday. Conference starts Tuesday. The awards ceremony is on the Thursday. And the lead time for getting the crystal trophies engraved is 4 weeks. They made 6 trophies. They got 6 trophies made. They kept their options open so that they could make that decision later. And this is another way you can create safety. You can ask, what would it look like if we were safe to fail? This is the graphic novel that introduces that concept. It's about 2-3 hour read because it is a graphic novel. It's like a comic strip. It's really good fun. I'm on page 76, so don't be surprised. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple because I know I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to skip a few slides and get to the important stuff. We're not going to do this. Breaking things down works really, really well in the complicated space. Trying things out works well if you're in uncertainty, if you're in that complex space where things might fail, make them safe to fail. Right, how do you make things safe to fail? This is the most important thing I can teach you, and I've got about 3 minutes to do it. A safe to fail probe has 5 criteria. A way of knowing it's succeeding, otherwise you won't be able to tell if it's working. A way of knowing it's not succeeding, a way of knowing it's failing. You've got to be able to dampen it and stop the effects if it's failing. And you've got to be able to amplify it if it's working and anchor it and make sure it stays in place. And the last one is called coherence. And coherence is a realistic reason for thinking this probe might have a positive impact. And you might be able to think of several different outcomes that could happen. Okay? Now, I'm a BDDer, so I like saying, can you give me an example? Right? It's a really simple question. Can you give me an example of what might happen if we do this? Think of a positive scenario in which this happens. Okay, and I use the BDD template for it. So I'm going to give you examples of these. I use well-formed outcomes when I am dealing with real life and trying to do BDD in real life. Well-formed outcomes are phrased in terms of what you can see, what you can hear, what you can sense with your body. There are 2 other senses. Your kinesthetic sense, so you might say, I will feel proud when I've done this thing. You know what pride feels like to you, okay? And proprioception, which is your sense of self. Sally Ann Freudenberg, who's sitting at the front here, can explain this way better than I can. Okay. The important thing to remember is that when you come up with these outcomes, they're just examples of what might happen. They are coherence, they are not tests. I wrote a whole blog post called Correlated in Retrospect, which is about what happens when you put targets in the wrong places in complex scenarios, right? So these are measurements, these are things you're looking out for, they're not tests to make sure it works. Okay. Have multiple success scenarios if you can. Here is an example, okay? This is a real example. I can't remember the PO's name, but it was a PO who didn't know much about her role. She contacted the coaches list, and this one coach said, you know, has anybody got anything which might help her understand her role? And I said, well, I've got this guide I've written, this document, you know, a little Word document. That should help her understand it better. And he said, that won't work because this is the most common pattern I see in human beings at all. Like, this is what every single human being does when they see a failure scenario. That won't work because. And we avoid failure. It makes us feel bad. We do not like it. And we say this to ourselves. And he literally wrote back, that won't work because. He hadn't read the document, he hadn't showed it to her, he had seen this failure scenario and he wanted to avoid it. She might get helplessly lost, right? He probably had some vague thoughts of all the different ways this might fail. And he was uncertain whether it would work, so he didn't want to try it. It was actually pretty safe. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't have felt helplessly lost. We have disposition in unpredictable spaces, and I reckon that that document and the context were disposed to work. I reckon the likelihood was high that they would work. But he could see this failure scenario. So what we want to do is we want to make it safe to fail. We do not want to have a way of avoiding failure completely. So you can change the context. You can make a context of safety. It might be as simple as saying, you know, we're trying this out. Can you try this out? And if it doesn't work for you, we'll try something else. It's going to be okay. It can be as simple as communicating that you want to run an experiment. Fail safe is what most people aim for. We want to try it out in our environment so that we can be sure it will work in production and then it will be fail safe. Safe to fail means if it doesn't work, it's okay. Can you see the difference between those two things? Look for ways to make safety in your teams, and leaders will emerge. They will grow their skills because they feel safe. Palchinsky Principles, just a quick introduction to this. The most important thing is do it on a scale where failure is survivable. So do small things to try things out. And that way, if they are wrong, you haven't invested a lot in them, you haven't made commitments on it. Seek out feedback from your mistakes and learn as you go along. This is how you grow yourself as a leader. I'm going to mention this paper just so you can look it up. This is a paper about taking the things which are working and anchoring them so that they stay working. It's the single most important thing you can do as a leader. And I'm going to poke at this book. I'm nearly done, very nearly done. This is a book by Paul Goddard. It's about improv. And improv teams have one simple principle. It's called yes and. You anchor what's there and you build on it. You go, yes, and I love that, and build on it. Okay? If you find yourself using the word but a lot, try turning it around. Yes, I agree with you, and I want to do this stuff. That's how you create safety. That's the single most important thing that you can do to get better and better in every way, every day, and to help people around you do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.